Hello, and welcome back to MASTERSOCK THEATRE. I am, of course, your host, Nigel Thornthread. So, if you would like to continue with the story of Episode 5, The Two Guardians, the magic story for this week, let us continue. Thank you for your patience waiting as I come back from using my personal liberties and all of that. But we resume with Jace. Hello everyone, I'm Jace. Of course I'm Jace, because I'm amazing. Anyway, Jace had never before seen so many elementals in so many different forms. If they weren't attacking him, he would have been fascinated. But they were attacking him, and it took his full skill and cunning to evade their blows, and not damage them in return. He knew that he had hoped to win Nissa back as a friend and ally. He couldn't damage Zendikar. He had to get the lithoform core. I need to get the lithoform core. He had to find a way to broker peace between the two guardians of Zendikar. I need to broker peace between the two guardians of Zendikar. From the corner of his eye, he saw Nahiri sprint into the singing city. He knew that whatever the Lithomancer was planning would not help any potential peace talks. Sweeping up both hands, Jace raced an illusion, a cloud of mist, thicker than natural, thick enough to disappear into, confusing the ivy and lichen elemental looming in front of him, buying himself some time. Under this cover, Jace ran. He slipped into the singing city moments before an ear-splitting roar of destruction bellowed behind him. He turned to see a massive wall of stone crushing the marble gates of the city, blocking the exit. The narrator is a little bit thirsty. Give me a moment. Leaving Jace trapped within, where its eerie tune, the singing city's eerie tune, began to hum again. Oh no! Nahiri could hear the elementals pounding against the city's walls, singing city's walls, banging their mud fists and moss wings uselessly at the stones. This sound pleased her. I am thoroughly pleased with my stonework. It is amazing. I am amazing. I'm always amazing. Especially with the stones. Nissa couldn't destroy her makeshift fortress, and not while Nahiri was within it, using her lithomancy to hold it together. I am so good with my lithomancy. Still, the thought of all those nature monstrosities attacking her made her skin crawl with dread. Being surrounded by walls and the haunting tune of unseen voices made her stomach lurch. It reminded her too much of being trapped in the Hell Vault again. Oh, don't want to be trapped in the Hell Vault! I hate being trapped! It's the worst thing ever! She lifted her arms, summoning bedrock and sandstone. Like a dance, She made them rise, knit together, become stronger, harder than the original walls of the Singing City, building herself a massive, indestructible fort above the ruins. Haha! I am really good at building indestructible forts and various other indestructible things. It's the stuff I love to do most. I love to make indestructible things. When they're weapons. Her body ached with effort, but she refused to let that foolish elf get her hands on the core. Not when she was so close to healing Zendikar, to returning it back to the stable, even world she once knew. Within her fortress, the pounding of the elementals grew muffled, and the city's song became a faint melody. Nihiri exhaled. She finally had a moment alone. Nahiri! Damn it. She knew who it was before she turned around. She recognized the pattern of Jace's steps on the footstones, but she hadn't noticed them until now. Really? That guy? He keeps always coming around when he's not wanted. I hate it. She turned to see Jace moving toward her. If you try to take the core, Nihiri said with deadly calm, I'll add you to my collection of wall hangs. That made Jace stop. I don't want to fight you, he said, raising his hands in a conciliatory gesture. But please, let's go to Ravnica. I think Nissa will listen to us there. Oh, she'll listen, replied Nihiri, anger rising in her. She'll listen, and when it comes time to choose, she'll choose to let this world stay fractured and ruined. She clenched her fists and began to unbuild the roof of her fortress, giving her access to the open sky. Turning her gaze upward, she called the Hedrons she made an age ago. She called every single one marooned around the Singing City. There were dozens. No, Jace, the core won't work on another plane. It stays here. I don't want to fight you, he said again, and there was no aggression in his voice. I don't want to fight you. But she heard what he wasn't saying, the silent half of that statement. But I will. I totally will fight you, because I'm Jace, and I'm right. Please, he said. But Nihiri was done. Done with these weak planeswalkers who clearly couldn't see what was in front of them. Her hands shook with emotion, and she used that energy to pull the Hedrons down around Jace and began to spin, confining him in their circle. Nihiri, said Jace with alarm. The Hedrons closed in around him and began to spin, confining him in their circle. Listen, please! Nihiri was done listening. I'm done listening. She rose into the air, her fury and hurt fueling her. With a twirl of her fingers, blue energy engulfs her hands, and she sent it to the Hedrons, trapping Jace within the dangerous ring. Then she commanded the ring to close. She wanted her face to be the last thing he ever saw. There was movement for the corner of her eye. She knew its shape, its posture, its cool and silent danger. Nihiri turned and was faced with her old mentor, her sworn enemy, Sorin! He was standing on the fortress wall, a dozen feet away from her at eye level. His long black jacket flowed out behind him. He was smiling. "What are you doing here?" said Nahiri through gritted teeth. Soren didn't respond. He just lifted a hand in that dangerous way she knew so well, the slight movement that heralded a terrible attack. "No, not you too!" Nahiri bared her teeth and screamed. She sent a giant stone foot shooting up from the ground directly at the vampire's chest. Bam! Soren disappeared in a rush of stones and Nahiri exhaled. Then an instant later he reappeared, still smiling like nothing had happened at all. Nahiri blinked, confused. She reached for the stones under Soren's feet and discovered that they weren't supporting the vampire's weight. "This is an illusion," she realized. "This is Jace!" But the realization came a moment too late. A mist flooded in around her, too thick to see through. She heard her hedrons clatter to the ground. Suddenly, her thoughts were not her own. It worked, Jace thought as the hedrons hit the surrounding ground. He could feel Nahiri's mind struggle against his control. He hated that it had to come to this, but his choices were limited. The singing city's eerie hum began to grow in volume. Better hurry. He wasn't sure if he could hold Nahiri's mind and a silencing spell simultaneously. Nahiri floated to the ground and he commanded her to hold still. Cautiously, he approached. Reached into the satchel on her hip, took the lithoform core. It glowed like a beacon in his hand, pulsing gently with the promise of power. The haunting song of the city swelled in volume, and Jace found himself filled with a sudden, inexplicable longing. He saw himself wielding the core's energy, solving problems without needing to debate or fight with others, without needing to throw himself or his friends in harm's way. With the core, with a thought, he could easily change the world. All worlds. No, that's not who I am. Jace pushed the temptation away. He groaned as Nahiri's mind thrashed against his control with renewed force. There was rage in her expression, every line of her paralyzed body as she fought against him. His hold on her almost slipped, but Jace regained it at the last moment. "Let me out of this fortress. Lower the wall around the entrance," he commanded. Nahiri's mind balked at the order, but he heard the sound of stone toppling in the distance, the elemental's attack growing louder. Jace winced. They should be trying to find a solution for Zendikar together, not fighting against each other. He could take the core to Ravnica right now. He should. Nahiri claimed that the core only worked on this plane, but he wanted to test that theory, safely away from the already damaged world. He also knew that if he disappeared with the core without telling Nissa, he would lose her trust forever. He wanted her friendship and needed her in the battles to come. Jace wrapped the core in his cloak and sprinted out of the singing city, running as fast as his exhausted body could. The haunting song was growing louder now, stealing into his bones. Jace ran faster, faster than he realized he ever could. He needed to get to the entrance before Nahiri regained herself and sealed it up again. He needed to reach Nissa. He crossed the ruined marble gates in an instant before his control on Nahiri's mind slipped and stone walls slammed up against the ancient city. Oh, safely on the other side, he thought with some satisfaction. He didn't see the giant limb of roots and green buds until it was on top of him, until the elemental pinned him down with one of four massive hands leaned over him, blocking out the sunlight. Jace gasped, recognizing Ashaya. Ashaya! "I need to talk to Nissa!" he shouted, but Ashaya just increased the pressure on his sternum. Balling his fist, Jace created an illusion of fire around them, wild and consuming, hoping to create enough of a distraction to escape. But Ashaya wasn't fooled. The elemental calmly reached into Jace's cloak and pulled out the lithoform core. "Wait!" Jace groaned, but the elemental didn't. It examined the artifact for a moment before tossing the core over its shoulder and into Nissa's waiting hands. Wait! You can't do it. You don't know. She should destroy it. That was Nissa's initial thought as she held the lithofoam core in her hands for the first time. Listen to me. The thought was not hers, though the voice sounded familiar. She looked over to where Jace was struggling under Ashaya's grasp. His expression was pleading. Tentatively, she allowed Jace into her thoughts. Nissa, please, we need to stop this, Jace thought. Call off the elementals. If we stop Jace, Nahiri will take the truce as an opportunity to overwhelm us. You've seen how ruthless she is. There was a loud crash as the thick walls around the city began rearranging themselves. Nahiri appeared atop the stone chaos. The elementals flooded around her at once. Please, Jace thought, let's go to Ravnica. We can study the core together. What makes you think we won't accidentally annihilate Ravnica? Nissa replied. I've seen the damage the core can do. We should destroy it. Nahiri said it won't work outside of Zendikar. It'll be safe to test it there. In the distance, Nahiri began trapping elementals in prisons of stone, her movements focused, precise, and furious. Nissa's breath caught as 4 impenetrable walls shot up around her in a river elemental. Nahiri is not known for her truthfulness, Jace. Gritting her teeth, Nissa thrust out her hands and sent a wave of green energy straight at Nahiri. Listen to me. Nahiri screamed a battle cry, Wah! And deflected Nissa's energy with a massive bedrock wall. Listen to me. I am listening to you, Jace, she shouted. You aren't listening to me. Not him. Me. The core was flashing urgently in her hand. Nissa realized why the voice sounded so familiar. There was something in its cadence, as if the pulse, the vibrations, and breath of Zendikar she knew so well had found its words. Who are you? Who are you? She asked. I am me. I am you. 50 feet away, Nahiri smashed a stone foot into an earth elemental, catching it by surprise. It crumbled to its knees. Nissa shot a tangle of vines at Nahiri's ankles. Why are you only speaking now? She said to the core. Nahiri dodged the vines in one elegant twist and jump, landing neatly on her feet. There was a small rumble in the land's rhythm in its air. Nissa realized Zendikar was laughing. The chuckle from the core matched the land's pulse. How? She asked. This was impossible. Confusing. Nissa didn't have time for a new mystery right now. Nahiri was close and coming closer. But if this was Zendikar, really Zendikar... Nissa, please! Let me take the core, Jace thought. Nissa ignored him. The object in your hand is a very old piece of me. It's full of power, the voice from the core replied. Nissa frowned and aimed a fresh attack at Nahiri. Why? Why would the ancient core create this? To undo damage. 30 feet away, Nahiri batted aside the second vine attack with offensive sandstone. She stalked forward, stopping her advance 20 feet away from Nissa. Give me the core, Nissa! She shouted. Will you help me, Jace? Will you help me, Jace? Nissa thought. Jace nodded once, but even at a distance she could tell he was planning something. A moment later, she felt tendrils of power slip into her head. Nissa realized in one horrified instant that Jace is trying to take control of her mind. She snapped the mental link between them and silently asked Ashai to make sure Jace couldn't move. The elemental complied. piling all 4 limbs on the mage. Jace groaned. I knew this plane when it was hauled, Nahiri shouted. If you want to cling on to the broken piece, and you want to cling on to the broken pieces of it. Nissa studied her adversary, unsure of what to say. Nahiri was dusty and bleeding, but her anger and determination were indomitable. In that moment, Nissa realized how alone she was. What would Gideon do, she thought, then caught herself. No, what would I do? Trust your strength, whispered the power in her hands. Broken doesn't mean weak, Nahiri, replied Nissa. Broken doesn't mean that there isn't beauty or redemption. So says the broken planeswalker, retorted Nahiri, who destroys everything she touches. Nissa tightened their grip around the core. The words stung, but not as badly as they once would have, because behind Nahiri's cruel expression, Nissa saw fear. And in that moment, Nissa knew exactly what she would do. I will protect my home, my family. I will try and try again until I get this right. Broken doesn't mean a life is not worth living, Nissa said, standing tall, staring straight at the necromancer. You are what Zendikar once was, Nahiri. I am what it is now. Doubt flickered across Nahiri's face. It quickly faded, and Nahiri snarled, raising her hands. Scores and scores of hedrons appeared, hovering behind the air behind her. They began to twist and flow in a complex pattern, the energy sparking between them. Every elemental cowered and shrank away. Nissa understood in that moment that Nahiri would destroy them all before she would admit she was wrong. She would dampen the essence of Zendikar's spirit just to tame it. If Nahiri was allowed to do whatever it was that she planned, Nissa would be mourning the loss of yet another piece of Zendikar's battered soul. In her hand, the core shone like a beacon. The hedron spun around Nahiri faster and faster, gathering power like a storm just on the edge of breaking. What if I destroy, Nissa thought, like Nahiri? What if I destroy? I don't want to destroy. I don't want to destroy. Trust your strength, her home whispered. Nissa closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and imagined a better Zendikar, one not defined and hurting from the wounds of the Eldrazi, one not oozing from the poison they left behind, a healthier world, but still fragmented and dangerous and beautiful. The core warmed and hummed in her palms. She felt Zendikar's ley lines stretched out before her, and easily, so easily, Nissa's magic merged with the core's power. She set it loose! There was a flash, a dull roar. A gust of wind struck Nissa, knocking the breath from her body, smelling of ash and rain, of earth and streams, of magic ancient and terrible. The power from the core collided with the hedrons in a shower of sparks and energy. The dull roll became a screaming bellow. The light became blinding. The air rushed away. Then there was nothing at all. Nissa opened her eyes slowly, terrified of the silence, the sudden emptiness she felt around her. Even the core had gone quiet and dull in her hands. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat and panic rise up from her chest. The singing city was gone. It had been flattened into dust. So was a large swath of the forest, all reduced to ash. Across the battlefield, the elementals were lying motionless in the dust. "No!" she whispered and rushed to the nearest one. A large jaddy tree embodiment with delicate yellow flowers twining around its limbs. She dropped to her knees beside it, putting a hand on its rough bark skin. "No! Not again! Not again!" The elemental stirred under her hand. It opened its eyes, blinking sleepily, and got to its feet. At first a bit shaky, but with more strength and confidence each passing second. It took her hand, gave it a squeeze, and Nissa felt it growing taller. Stronger. Tears pricked the corners of Nissa's eyes as all around the battlefield elementals were rising, dusting themselves off, becoming fuller, more vibrant. She felt herself dropping the core, heard it hit the ashy ground, but it didn't matter. The ancient artifact had grown silent. Its light had gone out. It had served its purpose, Nissa realized, smiling. It had undone damage. She closed her eyes and listened. She heard Nahiri picking herself up painfully from the ground. A dozen feet away from her, Jace was doing the same. Further away, green, tender, jaddy roots were sprouting in the ruined forest. Further than that, rich, unbroken earth was supplanting the diseased waste that remained from the battle with Emrakul. And further than that, Bala Ged was blooming again, growing, the forest coming back at speeds that only magic could accomplish. Zendikar was healing, turning into something healthier, stronger than it was before the battle with the Eldrazi. Though the scars were still there, they were memories now, not its defining features. For the first time in a long time, Nissa let out a genuine laugh. And she heard Zendikar laughing with her. "Trust my strength," she thought. Nissa called up her vines and grinned as they grew and twirled underneath her, raising her in the air. She turned east, and quick as the wind, she followed the ley lines of the land, flying through the forest, toward Bala Ged, traveling as only she knew how. Rushing forward, ahead, all while Zendikar hummed happily in her ears. Nissa was finally home. Jace picked up the inert core and watched Nissa disappear. He considered calling after her, but realized it was no use. Mistakes were made here today, and more than a few were his. Now, he understood how Nissa felt after the war in Ravnica. Around him, elementals were standing tall and healthy, swelling with vigor. One by one, they melted back into the land or disappeared into the jaddy trees. Something brushed against his boot. Startled, Jace stepped back, looked down. In the dust and wreckage around him, vines and young shoots were sprouting up from the destruction, thriving and growing at a remarkable rate. Like a life bloom after the royal, he thought. He'd read about life blooms, but had never seen one. "Is the power gone?" Nahiri asked, coming up beside him, kicking a vine. It took Jace a moment to realize he was talking about the lightless core in his hands. "I don't know." "It wasn't hers to use," Nahiri said with a disgust. "I think she was precisely the person who should have used this power," replied Jace. Nahiri scowled. "We need to apologize to Nissa," he said. "We were wrong." Nahiri scowled again. "You think you could fix this?" she snapped. "With an apology? You made enemies again today, Jace, but that's your nature, isn't it? Whenever you try to do good, it just makes things worse." Jace didn't reply. He didn't try to argue as the ancient core turned and planeswalked away. He was beginning to realize some battles weren't worth fighting, but some were. Nissa, he thought. "I'm so sorry, I should have listened better." He had caused so much damage here, both to his friend and to the home she loved. And he knew the terrible guilt he felt in this moment would not lessen with time. So, as Jace stood in the dust of Zendikar with the dead core in his hands, with new life clinging and wrapping its tender shoots around his boots. He hoped what Nissa said was true, that broken things could be redeemed. I am Nigel Thornthread. Thank you for joining me for MASTERSOCK THEATRE. That was Episode 5, The Two Guardians. I hope you have enjoyed all of this. It was extremely impromptu by my host, and I did not realize that I needed to be on screen today, but, well, we have sufficed. Now, an intermission will take place, and then we will get back to your usual programming on the RIPTIDE Project Laboratory channel. But I want to thank you, and welcome to the MASTERSOCK Theater. Good night!